and a lot of it has been distorted. The general revenue clause is grossly distorted. We have to revisit that to make sure that people don't use that to endorse the welfare state. We have to look at the interstate commerce clause and not use that as an excuse to regulate everything in and out of state and intrastate. We ought to look at the necessary and proper clause in Article 1, Section 8, because that's been grossly abused. We ought to look at things like Article 1, Section 8 that tells us what we can do and can't do. And maybe we could go into wars without declaration wars if we really understood these issues. But more importantly than maybe all of them, because it is the litmus test on restraining government, and that is our founders detested the idea and understood the danger of allowing governments and central banks to print money out of thin air, because that is guaranteed that government will spend too much money if the politicians know that there's somebody always there to print the money. That is the reason it's in there. No gold, only gold and silver can be legal tender. If we believe in liberty and believe in the Constitution, believe me, we would understand exactly what has made America great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ron, let's keep that train of thought going. And again, thanks for coming. The federal government now has a lot of control over education, healthcare, transportation, energy, banking, our financial institutions. If you were president, what would you begin to downsize, eliminate, redirect to states? What are the programs at the federal level that we need to get out of the federal government?
Well, that's a difficult question because that's a long list. I'd rather you give me the list of one of the things we should keep.
Yeah.
That would be a short list.
Well, let's flip it around then. What should the federal government be doing?
Well, we should have a system of sound money and property rights and contracts. We should have a judicial system. We should have a government and a defense of this country. That was not meant to be for the states, but not a heck of a lot else. We weren't supposed to have 100,000 federal bureaucrats who carry guns. People are supposed to carry the guns, not the bureaucrats. So, no, I think everything should be up for grabs and it should be grossly reduced. And both parties have added departments endlessly for the last 5, 6, 7 decades. And that's why freedom is not the issue anymore. It's tyranny, it's big government, and we're trying to struggle to hang on to this. But I think we're in a desperate state of affairs because it's slipping by, and with the economy in shambles like we have today, I think we're in much bigger trouble than a lot of people realize.
You mentioned the Federal Reserve, and you and I have worked on the idea of an audit. It's bringing out a few things that we didn't know. They're apparently printing a lot of money, buying our own debt. What is the solution with the Federal Reserve? Do we need to return to a gold standard? You talk a lot about sound money. Exactly what would you do as president?
Well, the president has a limit to what he can do because the Federal Reserve was created by the Congress. It could be restrained by the Congress. It could be eliminated by the Congress. But the most important thing is for the people to understand the business cycle. Who causes the business cycle and how do we get into recessions and depression? And that has to do with the Federal Reserve. So you can't wave a wand and get Federal Reserve. Even I, who have written about and talked about the Federal Reserve, I don't say close the Federal Reserve down in one day. But I would like to at least see competition. Why can't we legalize the Constitution on money? Competing currency, let gold and silver be used for legal tender. Today, if you use gold and silver, you can go to prison. And the counterfeiters are over there at the Federal Reserve. So what we need, and you join me and Steve as well on auditing the Fed is very important. I mean, what we found out, even though we didn't get the audit, we passed it in the House but not in the Senate, but what we got in the audit was that we found out in the bailout, the Fed was involved with $15 trillion passing out to their buddies, 1/3 of it going to foreign banks. I mean, this is such an outrage. It's bigger than the Congress itself. So it has to be reined in. And at certain period of times in our history, Jefferson got rid of a central bank, Jackson got rid of a central bank. And when the issues of money goes before the people, they always vote for sound money because it makes sense to say, why should the politicians be able to spend at will and then just print money when they need it? And then they wonder why we get into trouble. So yes, we have to take the Fed on because it does cause the business cycle. If you want to understand recessions and depression, you have to understand the Federal Reserve System.
Ron, as you know, the president's going to call us all in this Thursday and give us another speech on creating jobs. What would be your jobs plan?
Well, what you need to do is repeal about 70 years of bad economic policy, which isn't all that easy because we follow Keynesian economics, and Keynesian economics teaches that you need to spend more money. No matter how much debt the people are in debt and the government's in debt, they advocate just more spending. So you have to reverse that concept. No, we have to do a lot. We have to repatriate our capital. When you have a weak currency, capital leaves our country. So we've been issuing the reserve currency of the world, so our dollars go out and buy goods and services, so our jobs go with it. So you have to change that. So it's a monetary issue. But you also have to look at the tax code. You have to, you know, everybody's talking about cutting a little bit on the capital gains. I want to get rid of the capital gains tax and get rid of the income tax, shrink the size of government. Believe me, you would have the jobs then. But of course, it's not going to be easy because half the people in this country, they sort of like receiving your money, and they're not going to go away easily. But what it's going to lead to is the destruction of our currency and the bankruptcy of the country, and that's going to be much worse than somebody withstanding a cut. But you have to change that. You have to change the regulatory code, the tax code, the monetary system, and really, I believe you have to change the foreign policy because that's a drain. All great nations fail because they spread themselves too widely around the world, and we've done it as well.
Well, let's take the last minute and just give us your perspective of foreign policy, what needs to be changed.
Well, I would take the advice of the founders, and I would take the advice of George Bush when he ran in the year 2000. No nation building. You know, don't be the policeman of the world. He was highly critical of Clinton. So I would say that we should have a foreign policy of staying out of entangling alliances. I mean, why should we cheer on the entangling alliance of NATO and the United Nations? Here look at the mess we're in Libya today. So I would say we should be out of all those international organizations. We should defend this country, but it would mean bringing our troops home. Yeah! Let the troops come home and spend their money here. Now that would be a monetary injection I could support. But no, we're subsidizing the welfare state of Germany by paying for their defense and Japan as well as South Korea.
Representative King.
Thank you, Ron. I'd like to shift just a little bit and pick up on something I've been anticipating that Jim DeMint would ask, and that would be, I know you're on the record, balanced budget amendment. What conditions would you support in a balanced budget amendment?
Well, I don't want any chance that they would raise taxes to balance the budget. So, and I support the general concept of a balanced budget amendment, but I emphasize the spending side of the equation. You know, that we have to cut the concept of government, the appetite for big government. But, and again, the balanced budget amendment, we should do it. Jefferson wanted to have it. They rejected him. But if you don't deal with the Fed spending more money than we spend, you know, it doesn't accomplish anything. They, you know, spent trillions of dollars more, so we have to deal with that whole concept.
There's going to be a vote on a balanced budget amendment, at least we anticipate. And that balanced budget amendment is not defined in the bill that sets up the super committee. And so there is a balanced budget amendment that's on the calendar of the House that caps it at 18% of GDP, requires a supermajority to waive the balance, to raise taxes, or to, raise taxes or to waive the balance. Would you support a constitutional amendment that put those conditions in it?
Assuming you think that's, you know, a restriction, a good restriction.
Yes. Yeah,
I would lean toward doing that, but I don't think there's enough restrictions on there because I think there's a fallacy in our GDP. Because, you know, if we rebuild a lot of buildings because we have hurricanes, the GDP goes up. So the GDP is not a good measurement of economic growth. But no, I would certainly, most likely I would support that, but I don't like the GDP approach because it's a deceptive economic term.
Okay, let me, Robert Rector of the Heritage Foundation released a study a year and a half or so ago that identified 72 different means-tested federal welfare programs, 72. And I'm pretty confident no one could list them from memory nor describe how they work. How would you address this welfare state that America has become?
Well, it's going to be difficult unless we change the attitude of the people, because we're living now with a third or fourth generation that have been taught that entitlements are rights. And liberty and rights aren't have anything to do with entitlements. Entitlements means that you can take somebody else's money, and the government's there to redistribute it. So you can't do it. You have to do, waste, fraud, and abuse. We have to do whatever we can, but that's not it. It's the philosophy of the entitlement system. But every time, so often when we think about the entitlement, generally we think about, somebody's going to get food stamps. Well, let me tell you, the big entitlements goes to big corporations. That's where that's where a lot of the money goes. You have to look at everybody who gets a check. And a lot of corporations get special benefits and checks, so that whole idea of redistribution of wealth has to be challenged. But any program that you can, chisel away at, I think you have to do it. But that's the crisis we face, because we've witnessed it already. Every time you go and make a little cut, some of our state governors try to make cuts, and there's a lot of dissent. A lot of people get very angry over it, and we have to be prepared for that, because the financial crisis is going to get a lot worse. By next summer, the big tax is coming, and that's going to be the inflation tax, because we have fallen back on this idea that we can spend and print money, and the devaluation of our currency every single day is being devalued sharply. And if you look at its relationship to gold, you realize how big of the trouble is that we're facing.
I just concede to your points on currency and the Fed, and go to the welfare state of this again. And I would pose this question, that there's data out there that shows that 47% of the households don't pay federal income tax, 51% of wage earners don't pay federal income tax, with 72 welfare programs out there. So if you could fix the Fed, are the rest of these a problem? And how do you really address those so that it's effective?
Well, I would say that when people ask me that half the people don't even pay taxes, I say we're halfway there. But no, I know you don't want me to talk about the Fed, but it's the Fed that causes the deficits and the entitlement, because we don't have to tax people, we don't have to borrow the money. Everybody knows that if Congress runs up these debts, the Fed is the lender of last resort. They're the creator of the money of last resort. So you can't address entitlements unless you look at the monetary system.
Okay, well, all right, I want to go another step in this. The global reach component of this, as you were finishing up when Jim was talking, what's the globe look like if you start bringing back American troops? You pull them out of Germany, out of Japan, out of Korea. Is there any place out there that you would have forces outside the territory of the United States?
No, I'd bring them all home. I'd bring them home.
Would you then project power into any part of the world with the Navy?
No, power. You want to have the facility to defend our country, but we're less able to defend ourselves right now, because the number one threat to us now is terrorist attacks. And before 2003, when we went into Iraq, on the average there were 3 suicide attacks per year. By 2007, there were 700 per year. So the attacks have grown by leaps and bounds because of the very presence that we have overseas. The troops are over there because of miscalculation, and the miscalculation is the fact that we've never asked, as a country, what was the motivation of 9/11. If you don't ask the motivation and you continue to do the same thing, those numbers of attacks are going to grow and grow, and the more troops you put around the world and looking at the sanctuary rather than at the problem, the greater danger we're going to be in, and the more vulnerable we'll be in. And besides, we're bankrupt. We can't afford it anymore. So I would bring the troops home. It would be a big boom to the economy. I believe we would have a stronger national defense, not a weaker national defense.
Trustee George.
Congressman Paul, thanks for being with us today.
As you know, after the Civil War, the Constitution was amended 3 times, and there were additional powers delegated to the national government. And I want to call attention particularly to the power delegated to the national government in the 5th section of the 14th Amendment, and that's the power to enforce the guarantees of privileges and immunities and due process and equal protection in the 1st section of the amendment. Now, I know that you have a